Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. The Last Dinosaur is where we discuss the latest in digitization within the maritime space. Today's guest is Cristina Aleixendri Muñoz, COO and co-founder at Bound for Blue. Bound for Blue develops automated wind-assisted propulsion systems as turnkey solutions for all ship owners and shipping companies seeking to reduce fuel costs and polluting emissions. It is suitable for all classes of ships, including tankers, bulkers, ro-ros, cruises, ferries, gas carriers, and general cargo vessels, regardless of size or age. This is really interesting. I know some of you look forward to hearing about digitization. We're going to get to that, but I think what's happening with wind and not only the decarbonization, but it's always part of digitization. They go hand in hand. We're going to have a great conversation today with Cristina. Cristina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here.
I met Cristina back at the CMA in March of this year, and I said, I have to have you on because every time I've seen her on webinars or presenting or other things, it's been really fascinating to hear and to hear her talk but with passion. So tell us today a little bit about what's going on with Bound for Blue.
For all of those that really don't know what Bound for Blue is doing, we're going back to the origins of shipping with sort of a different tech. And in fact, I really liked it a lot because what we're doing is a suction sail. So basically, the application of something that was first applied by the NASA in the 20s. So basically, we're hacking the airflow surrounding the profile to generate more and more lift. And that is translated into a ship in more and more sailing. So basically, using wind to propel ships in a different way. So that's great. So clearly, I ended up here in Bound for Blue and studying this business, not really thinking a lot about it, in the sense that we saw together with my colleagues, we saw a problem and we saw that with our background, we could give it a solution. My background is coming from aeronautics. So basically, this clearly serves somehow as the foundation of what we've developed. And basically, what I'm doing at Bound for Blue, you were saying operational side, co-founder. I think I'm wearing more the hat of a co-founder than on the operational side, which means I'm wearing all hats at every moment, whenever it's necessary, especially at a company stage in which we are. We're nearly 50 growing. We expect in spring somehow to be around 70, 80. And hopefully stabilizing around 120. So the team is in the growth stage, and this means that I need to be involved in a lot of, I say fires, but anyways, a lot of challenges in the growth side. And highlights about Bound for Blue, what we're doing. So basically, we have today 4 installations already running. So demonstrated our technology, 6 in the pipeline, working with owners I never imagined before we would work with. Eastern Pacific Shipping, Odfiel, Louis Dreyfus Company, Marubeni, and a lot of others. So all around the world. We are just validating the results, and I know we will get there into the data point and the digitalization, but we're validating these results at third party with Lloyd, and other third-party validations are coming up with other classification societies like DNV or Puro Veritas. And yeah, most recently we got the full type approval by DNV, so we're very, very glad to see that all the design and everything we've built is gaining the recognition also at a technical point of view and a safetiness point of view by one of the largest classification societies. But for sure, like getting to here has been quite I wouldn't say a challenge, but a lot of challenges altogether until today. So yeah, happy to dive deep later into that.
We could start right there. I think if you even go back 5 years ago in our industry, wind assist was kind of more of one of the, or maybe it was a little bit more longer now at this point, 7 years, but certainly wind assist was a little bit more of a fringe type way to reduce emissions. I don't want to say people didn't take it seriously, but I think better off they didn't take it seriously, seriously enough. Talk about now, like some of the changes in the industry that you've seen at the time that you started Bound for Blue and maybe leading up to that, and some of like kind of the mindset shifts. I mean, you put out some really big names there, Louis Dreyfus, Marubeni. These are big, not only ship owners, but cargo owners, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, both of them have interest on both sides, whether it's time charter or so on. But talk about some of the mind shift that you've seen and how maybe that there's been a couple of leaders in the industry that have really started, helped set the pace for others in the industry.
First of all, I would say, yeah, they weren't taking us seriously, and that's not a problem at all. I mean, I don't blame them. Even my sister at that time was suggesting me to look for a real job. Like, she wasn't even seeing it neither. So really, that's the way it was. And I guess there's a point into, for sure, innovating in shipping was hard at the time, and it still is hard. I mean, putting a hardware solution that is so large, that has so many like sort of risks associated, either real risks or what was that at that moment perceived risks, which were quite of a different. And then with the introduction of more technologies being installed, proven, no really major fault or whatever on this type of systems, really that has built into the credibility side. And as I'll always say, then the perceived risk goes down and the real risk is the one it is, but it has also gone down because you've demonstrated a lot of stuff. And then something that really helps into decreasing that perceived risk is also the regulatory side. I mean, regulations are pushing very hard in the industry as of to decarbonize, and that not only includes the IMO regulations, but also the new EU regulations. And it's not just about EU ETS, but also FuelEU, and being wind propulsion precisely the only technology embedded into FuelEU which has a reward factor, so basically helping into reducing the compliance cost. So that clearly has made a huge change in the perception of the whole market. But I don't blame them. I mean, it was very hard to believe in us at that time. That was one of the biggest challenges, convincing an owner to install our solution at that time.
Well, I think you hit upon a lot of really interesting points. I mean, certainly the regulation has the wind has blown in your favor, to be kind of a little bit of a pun. Sorry, dad joke. I am a dad. Has blown in your favor in terms of the regulations, right? Because those regulations are lending well to what you're trying to do, as well as other things like credits, for saving fuel, or a ship owner can have a better CII rating, which leads to better higher rates for them ultimately, whether it's time charter or otherwise. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing there from owners as they get into the equation of installing your product into not only compliance, but also actually income.
Basically, you have this perfectly described it. I would say there's a big group that came to us because not only because decarbonization, but operational efficiency. So basically looking into the fuel saving side. So if you look at the fuel aspect, there were a lot of people in the industry at that time speaking about new alternative fuels, even realizing they were going to be expensive, that they weren't even going to be supplied at that time, but yet they were basically focusing their whole strategy into the fuel alternative side and not looking to the operational side and how much I can increase the performance of my fleet to really use as less fuel as possible, because the best fuel is the one you don't use. So that's really the big topic here. And then there's another big bunch of owners for sure that they were neither on one side, neither on the other at that moment. So they were saying that fuel was not an option, but they couldn't believe on the wind propulsion side. Now they see results, and for sure they see the operational side, but it's being driven a lot today and the regulatory compliance. So it's not just about CII. If you see FuelEU seems, I always like to put this analogy. I'm not sure if you know the frog that you put in a place with water and you start
the boiling frog. Yeah.
It starts getting hotter and hotter, and eventually the frog dies. So today, and even at SMM, there were owners like really coming and say, I don't care what you put and install on my ship. Really, I need it to comply with FuelEU. FuelEU is going to kill me because I have a huge exposure on EU. So basically, there's like different ways of approaching the tech. Those ones that approach it first, really visionaries. Those ones that approach it today, for sure on the decarbonization aspect. But at the end of the day, you need to justify the investments. And that's the good side of wind propulsion, that is really justified. And then there's others that are much more driven into the regulatory aspect, which really, if you look at in 2040, and that's not so far away from today, and even 2030, FuelEU is going to provide you the same regulatory compliance, cost reduction, than even the fuel savings in some cases. So it really is a huge driver and an ignite to the application of wind.
Right. So really wind is becoming just this a way to become compliant, and not only become compliant, but then, like you said, for some owners to still continue to be in existence, over that period of time in the next, 5.5 or 6 years as we sit here today. The other part of this regulation is getting approval. We talked a little bit about this. You had to work with class and other things. I mean, that also is a big step because this is class putting their reputation on the line to get these things approved. But they can't ignore their clients are requiring class to help them save money and or stay in existence. Talk a little bit about that as well, because that's a big mind shift. When you think of class societies, I mean, I go back to my sailing days. It was, kind of a quasi-governmental organization that moved very slowly. But talk about this a little bit here, about your experiences.
I guess that when you're in shipping, it's very easy somehow to complain for what you have. But for me, like from an outsider coming from aeronautics, really seeing class societies as something private was great and amazing. And I want to put this into perspective. So if you go into an airplane design, if you want to change anything on that design, that really takes years and years. And we're speaking about more than 10 years, not until you implement, but until you get like an approval by the public entity. So that's tremendous. But then if you compare about it, wind propulsion, we were installing wind propulsion systems, and I'm not just speaking about me, but other wind propulsion systems on class ships without having to certify the whole system. So basically they were just getting maybe a reinforcement, the pedestal.
Yeah.
They were thinking about, stability, some sort of stuff for sure. And those classification societies that were more onto the wind side of sailing ships and that had this history really were applying much more the regulation and were studying to really draft those certifications and processes. And for sure, this is maturing with the industry. I mean, at the beginning, and I really appreciated that, they weren't intending to have something really, really looked, and I mean, like that really there was nothing that was missed, but rather they were like putting what they knew, what should be checked, and learning with us too. And then applying new measures like new certification processes, new checks, new points that had to be looked. So really for me, I mean, it was an enabler to introduce technology. And I'm gladly appreciate that from the shipping sector.
Yeah, I guess compared to, let's say, the US FAA versus
Sure.
Lloyd's or ABS or DNV and these other ones. And I know some of them are very progressive. I'm not going to single out one, but I will single out one, but not in a negative way. But, DNV is, if you ever hear the head of DNV talk, is always about progress, always about moving to sustainability and digitalization, smarter fuels, carbon capture, things like this. He's always talking about this. And you're seeing a lot of the other class societies, ABS and so on. All these are really starting to embrace this. But then the other part is, and I like to talk to you because yes, we are about the digitalization. We'll get to that in a second, but you guys are a hardware firm, and hardware is a lot different than installing software, especially as something as substantial as a wind sail. You have to deal with manufacturing. Talk about some of those challenges, because I think that's something that, we sit here at a desk job and it'll get done. Those are people, and that's a place, and you have to find the material and source the material, and it has to be consistent because you can't have, any sort of changes. You have to make sure it's installed correctly. Talk about some of those challenges, because I think that's something that talk about installation of SaaS and all this other stuff, which is where I make my money, my bread and butter. But this is the part that helps gather the info, and then we'll talk about getting it off the ship in a second. But talk a little bit about that part, and your experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to like infra value or like the software side, because it's needed. But for sure, the hardware side is entailing a lot of like challenges to bring a company, a product, a solution to the market, really growing the company. And first of all, I would say is the investment side. And even at the point where Bound for Blue started, there was no investment for industrial companies like us. And sustainability wasn't a buzzword, not at all. I mean,
No.
you were going to European VCs and they were saying, do you have like the next Uber or something like that? And I was like, no, not at all. I mean, sort of different.
It's funny because that's what everybody wants in that's a whole other story. I am of the mindset of the next Uber for our business probably won't happen in it. And it has a lot to do with the personalities and the risk. If you don't have an Uber show up, all right, maybe you're 10 minutes later, you miss a train, but or if you have a bad Uber show up, maybe your clothes smell a little funny. That's very different from ships. People want their hands in that. But I'm sorry to get off track there, but yeah, I
No,
can see
but
that.
you're right. And even the PCs, like the ones that were analyzing the opportunities, had no idea about shipping. So they were saying, I invest in mobility, but mobility meant cars. And
Right,
it not only meant cars, like hardware, it meant softwares
right,
for something related to mobility.
right,
So really, nobody was understanding us. And we, for sure, were successful in securing investment, a lot of public funding, a lot of private side from wealthy individuals coming from shipping, for sure, because they understood the market, they understood the product and the problem. But it wasn't until recently that going into the market was much more easy to
right.
finance the development of hardware. So basically, we had to survive and develop everything with public side, public funding. And so that was hard. First of all, developing hardware takes a lot of time and takes a lot of money because you literally need to build stuff. So when I was speaking about with VCs, they were saying, but why do you need so much money? And I was saying, have you built a building? I mean, the first sail we installed was 12 meters high.
Right.
So basically it was literally a building.
Yeah.
So why do I need money? There's like man work.
Yeah.
We really need that money to invest, go to wind tunnel tests,
Yeah.
softwares, and there's a lot of things. Then for sure, there's the growing on the manufacturing side, there's the growth aspect. So basically, as a company coming in shipping, newbie, if you want to think it that way, we need to be global from day one. So basically, all our operations, we need to be able to not only install our sails wherever it is in the world, manufacture globally, and give service to those ships.
Right.
And if you look at other industries, let's say software, then in shipping, it doesn't mean you need to be global with a global presence on operational aspects. But if you even look at other places, if I were to build or to manufacture t-shirts, well, I can start regionally here in near Barcelona, then I can grow a little bit in Spain, then maybe Portugal and France. No. This is like, no, I'm going to sell t-shirts and I'm going to be Zara from day one.
Right.
So basically, that's what you or the market is asking and demanding
Right.
for
Yeah.
you to really exist. And then there's another big aspect, which is so in software, you can, and in fact, I understood from software developers that it's okay to have a percentage of error, because if not, that means you've spent too much time.
Yep.
But in hardware, you cannot have this percentage of error, because that means either your system works or it doesn't work.
Right.
Either your system breaks or it doesn't break. So there's the points, really, you need that sort of perfection
Right.
from day one.
And and that's the whole kind of like software side, which I've acquainted with, things like Agile, MVP. Just put it out there. Now, yeah, we can launch it, and yeah, we could add these other things later once we get feedback from the clients, right? And that to me is something that you can't say, oh, we have the sale, but we don't have like this part of it. Like, no, you can't. Like, you could test tolerances and other things, I imagine, in a test tank, but that takes then you're buying more test time in whatever kind of facility, or even if it's like a 3D simulator, you're still, it's costing you more money rather than running a bench test on a development platform and going, oh, this isn't going to work, or we got to make a tweak. I mean, it's very different, two very different levels of cost.
And that really is like ringing a bell. I remember when we had to pivot. So pivoting in software is very easy. Like
Oh
starting
yeah.
somehow, you never start from scratch. But in our case, we had to pivot from scratch. So literally, we were coming from aeronautics, so no connections with shipping. In shipping, they weren't taking us seriously. So basically, we're asking what was the payback that you would love to have for such technology. Some of them were saying 1 year, some of them 20 years. So what's the point of that? Zero. We were getting zero information at that time. Literally, we weren't able to get useful
Right.
information. So we ended up with a product that later on, when the market evolved and they were much more open, or either we were speaking to the right people, I don't know, really, it could be the two things. we had to pivot and start from scratch. So literally the system that we developed at the time was a rigid wing sail, collapsible one, was too expensive for the efficiency that it could be delivered. So we came up with the suction sail and implemented and introduced it into the market. So that literally is a huge difference between manufacturing hardware and software. And specifically on the growth side, where we are today, so I was saying, okay, on the growth side, the major challenge is being global from day one. And there's a topic I didn't mention, which is being present in Asia. So everybody here knows that the new builds are albeit in Asia, so China, Korea, Japan. And for a company like us, we need to really be inside the vendors list, really need to negotiate with those big yards. So our position is much more weaker than the one they have. And for sure they know that, but that's a big, big challenge on the expansion. So being able to put our technology on those new builds and be present on those places.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's really interesting. I mean, that gets into a whole other part of, you know, of that, right? You have to be there, you have to negotiate with the yards. And then you mentioned something else about being global is you're going to have to, you know, as you really start to push all of these different sails into all these different ships, you're going to have to start figuring out something else that software people don't need, because you could always, as soon as you're connected to a Wi-Fi, you could just hook into a patch or an upgrade, and that's getting your techs to get to the ships if and when there's, you know, adjustments or upgrades, or maybe there's a question, training or whatever. You're going to have another bad dad joke coming up, a fleet of people who are qualified to work on your sails as well.
That's a big topic for sure.
Yeah, that sounds like a really interesting one. And how do you certified people, or do you just work with other contractors? That's probably a different podcast for right now. But one thing we did tease a little bit, and we talked before we got going here, and I think it's a super important topic, and is that's, you know, the efficiency and everything else is great. It's getting that data kind of off of the ship. And this is where the interface with the software, the different types of software, as well as the sailors. Talk a little bit about kind of your experience first with the sailors and the crew, as well as the installation crew. And then talk a little bit about kind of how is the data getting off the ship to help the ship owner, operator, technical manager realize the savings that are promised. And this is not like saying Bound for Blues problem, but this is a problem for any technology that is working on the premise of improved efficiency. So it could be sales, it could be things like coding, it could be other types of aspects that you put around the hull to reduce drag or other types of things. Talk a little bit about some of those challenges.
That's a big topic. That's a big topic because, first of all, we need to understand that what Powerful is doing, and in this case, we're not selling a sail, a suction sail, we're selling performance.
Right.
So that means we need to justify how much it has been saving. So I'm not coming from the performance side. I'm not data analyst, not at all. So the first day we installed the sail on a ship, I went to the performance team and I said, "Hey guys, how much are we saving?" And they said back, "How much do you want it to save?" And I was like, okay, that wasn't my question, guys.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that one. That's interesting. Yeah.
There's different methodologies into how much it saves. And for sure, and I think I'll enter into that and how crew really enhances that. So basically, if you go into classification strategies, you can have the ISO, you can have digital twin models, which is a strategy that the Bureau Veritas is following to know the performance of wind propulsion. You can go into the really raw data, like have the ship prior 1 year, you're really benchmarking the ship, and then 1 year later you benchmark again, so you compare. So that's like really raw, and I would say this is like long-term trial validation of data, which is more similar to what Lloyd's register is doing, which is the one we're applying today for the EMS Traveler. And then there's like short-term sea trials. So the research centers, for instance, that they're getting the polar of the system, and basically they're getting several points and making a dedicated like short sea trial. So the question here is, which one is best? Well, we don't know. We have our own methodology. So what we want to do is prove the rest also. And up till today, for instance, the data side is really contrasting quite well. how we are validating. We have our own
Right.
methodology, which really maybe it's not a point to share because it's not by a third independent validated body,
Right.
but we
Right.
have our own methodology, which basically we benchmark. So what we're doing is benchmarking. So we calculate how much it's safe, literally, and we benchmark with these third parties. And for sure, what is published will be the third parties. But we want to prove that there's such huge differences one amongst to the other. And basically, when it's much better to apply one than to another, because of the data side, you require a lot of data, you require a lot of equipment, which might not be that suitable for all the ships. And the digital twin models, for sure, there's a cost on it, but it's much quicker. The polars, for sure, that's even quicker because you have the short-term sea trials, 1-2 days dedicated to
Right.
really put those points, and then you infer that the rest will be the same. So basically for this data, what we're doing is putting torque meters, flow meters. The whole system is fully sensorized, even like with redundancy sensors. We're getting data every second, but then what do you do with that data? So I'm not the expert here on the performance, and I'm sure that's off to another podcast with the performance team, which you would learn a lot of. But yeah, there's aspects like you need to clean the data from the sensors, and that's a big topic. This is a huge challenge that
Yes.
we've undergone, and I know there's a lot of companies that undergo this challenge. Or said in a different way, there's an untapped potential really for better sensors. So if anybody here is really keen on the sensor side and wants to develop something that is really, really accurate and yeah, does not have so many noise, then you have a whole market to explore.
You're
And
absolutely right.
yeah,
You're absolutely right. Sorry to cut you off, but you're absolutely right with getting that data off and having so much of it. And I dropped a recent episode with Essa Henteman from Napa, and he talked about this is one of the remarkable things that I heard this year. He said 90% of all the data on ships lives on the ship, doesn't come off for analysis or for further, really for further analysis. And I think, that's going to be something that's going to, like you said, is untapped. Now, I know you're saying about cleaner sensors, but certainly all that data needs to be cleaned up and analyzed in a way that is correct. So we're not kind of greenwashing. I don't suspect that, but people, data is data, right? How people use it is they could do a lot of different good and bad with it, and how to get it off and to get it into the right hands, I think is going to be one of the challenges, not with just wind, but with all the other things we talked about.
here really is when crew comes in.
Yeah.
So basically, the good side of wind propulsion is that the savings are double-digit savings. So when that's something I've learned. If the savings are too small to measure, they're very hard really to measure. So if somebody says it's a 2% fuel reduction, really, I'm not sure if it's a 2% or not.
Right.
Must be enough and relevant really to get that sense. And here I was saying, okay, which of the different methodologies is really the like methodology? And I would say that there is no the methodology, but rather it's important to get a sense of those savings. Are we speaking about 10%, 20%? It doesn't matter if it's 21 or 19, really, at the end of the day. Is it
Right.
really saving? And I guess this is one of the points. And this was hard for me. In aeronautics, we have physics on everything. But on shipping, really, I saw that of a different story. So basically, it's very difficult to calculate savings on stuff that even you have two ships that are identical, really identical sister vessels, and they deliver different savings doing the same
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
So that's a big topic. In aeronautics, this doesn't happen. So if you
Right.
have that doesn't happen.
You
So
have two Airbuses A380s or whatever, they're flying around 320s now, and they're produced, model number 123 and 124. They're pretty much going to do the same thing,
yes.
but you have two sister ships operated by maybe going back to the aeronautic one, you have maybe a local carrier, maybe a foreign carrier, from where they're produced. They're going to be basically the same thing, and they're going to have the same problems. They're going to have the same benefits. They're going to have the same fuel consumption. You have two sister ships, one run by, I look at, just for the tanker side, one run by, Chevron for U.S. Gulf type runs, and another one run by, a shipper in the Black Sea. Good luck. It's going to be very different, right? Or a technical manager, not a charter, right? It's going to be two different things.
So I guess here at least is, okay, let's get a sense of those savings. So it doesn't matter when we use our methodology and we are comparing towards other methodologies. If there's a huge difference, then we're worried about. But if the difference is slight, then that's okay. We need it to be in the order of magnitude. And then another point
Right.
really is the people side, the human aspect. So for us, it's very important that the crew realizes the potential of the wind propulsion. So the first time you can imagine a captain sees for the first time the sail and they say, okay, go sailing. He says or she says like, wow, this is too big. Is this
Yeah.
stable?
Yeah.
How about the calculations? Is this okay?
Right. Well, and
For
is
me,
this going to get in my way of navigation? And can I see
yeah,
around this thing, in tight
this is a
quarters? Yeah.
natural effect
Yeah.
of humans for sure. We are always looking into what we are doing on a daily basis. So basically, when there's something different, you get scared. Like
Yeah.
really, as humans trying to avoid that. But the first thing we do is, okay, just say, do whatever you want as you would do as normal. Then it starts sailing and we say, okay, now we will turn on the sail and we turn it on. And then magically they operate as usual, constant RPM, they see an increase of speed. And now we say, now we will turn off the sail and we turn off the sail and they see the decrease of speed.
Right.
Basically, they literally see that the sail is propelling. They
Yeah.
don't know how much or how is it working. I mean, they just see that increase of speed.
Right.
Now, for sure, the next step to get the savings is, okay, now reduce the RPMs, and now we want you to be at constant speed. So when we put the sail, if you're going at 10 knots, most probably the sail will give you whatever, 1 knot, 2 knot, whatever, depends on the number of sails, the size. Now go reducing the RPM until you keep the speed. And now you see the savings. So that's very easy. You don't need
Right.
a lot of data analysts to go into the numbers, to get data from a lot of years.
Right.
Basically, they see it and they say, wow, I like it. I have a Ferrari. So that's what they said, literally. Wow,
Yeah.
I think I have a Ferrari.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
they want that extra horsepower, right? Especially after all these years of, when the markets were bad, we got to slow steam, we have to do this, we have to do that. And now they're like, oh, well, you can reduce RPMs and go just as fast. And I'm sure that's an awakening. And I think, as they talk to whether it's a hardware or software, one of the big things that we've encountered is this is all about change management. This is 100% about changing the way that people do business, reducing their nervousness, I guess, is for lack of a better term, around this, and showing them that this is kind of the way forward and not taking their jobs. I think that's always a question with people. They get nervous that this is going to be the end of their jobs. What you're proposing is a way to keep their jobs, keep more ships on the float, and just add another way to for cost savings.
I guess here with all the digitalization side, the major risk is leaving people aside. So basically, when you try to embrace those people and precisely the crew who will be the first one to turn on, so this works
Right.
autonomously. You don't need people to make it work, but you need to
Right.
press the button. For sure, we can press it from the office, but we will never do that. But they shall press the button. If it has to stop, it stops autonomously. So nobody has to really stop it. So that's the key challenge, to really embrace that, people. And when you do it, they even think of ways on how to use it better. So we even created a new mode of operation for the sail just because of the captain, like saying, I would like to use it also for maneuvering. And I say, that's a great idea. Let's put it. So from the office, we updated the software and he was able to use it at the next port.
And, that's funny that upgrading the software, that you go back into your original kind of questions you got from VC, which was, transportation, different modals, and what software. I mean, begs the age old question of what is Tesla? Are they a car company or are they a software company, right? Because all of their upgrades for Tesla, as far as I understand, comes from, downloading it, being connected to Wi-Fi, and you get a couple more horsepower because they're able to tweak the engine or something. And that sounds very much the same thing, that, hey, you guys, were able to test something and now give some freedom to the ship to actually use the system a little bit more, maybe outside of the original way it was intended to.
Sure, the hardware is just the enabler for the software to come in.
Yeah.
And to really enhance that performance. I mean, the software itself, if you just look into performance optimization, has a limit. I mean, you cannot propel a ship just with performance optimization. You need energy
No,
at some point.
You
So,
do
so
it.
basically, this is an enabler to increase much more.
You do, and I think, and I'm not alone in this, nor am I a genius. Is that what you're doing and combined with other things is really going to be the path to 2030, 2040, 2050, right? It's not going to, wind isn't going to save the world all by itself, right? Carbon capture is not going to save the world all by itself. New hull coatings aren't, so on and so forth, right? But those things in combination are going to significantly lower the emissions profile of ships until maybe there is an adoption of something else. Maybe we do become fully wind. I don't know. I'm not prejudicing one way or another, but I think it's going to be in this combination as we start to make that transition. Uh, One of the questions I love to ask, going back to you when you started Bound for Blue and you entered maritime, you talk a lot about your experiences. I'm I'm a nautical and I'm an aeronautical engineer. I'm not a marine engineer. I'm not in the industry, which sounds like it had some benefits because you were able to go, well, yeah, but who cares, right? Or you think class is bad, you should see dealing with the FAA and its counterpart in Europe, right? Like this is nothing, fellas. And I think that's really good. What would you say if you go back to where you went to university or you see, other folks thinking about entering the industry? What would you say to them about joining maritime, whether it's for technology like yours or other things?
I think I infravalued those aspects when I entered, or I even maybe neither considered those. I just thought there was the problem, I have the solution, like sort of an engineer style.
You're an
Oh, and
engineer,
why not?
yeah, 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 yeah. You're
Why
an
not?
engineer,
I'm sort
yeah.
of that energetic. Just when you jumped in at CMA and you said, I have a podcast and I want you, then I was like, yeah, let's do it. So sort of that was Bound for Blue style. But now that I'm into shipping, there's three big things I really like about it. So one is how the industry is. So it's sort of a small family and a huge capacity to innovate, as I was mentioning, with the class societies being private, and really that's one of the big topics. Then there's the global side. So working with so many people around the world, so not just being at a smaller scale. So that really enhances the way I see the world, the way I approach problems. That is amazing, seeing different technologies, different ways of doing business within the same industry. So the possibilities are endless here. And then for sure, the last point, and that's something really close to my heart, is the decarbonization aspect. So decarbonization is in the agenda now. So for those who are not looking into shipping or are very new to it and really are not seeing that potential, I would say look at the automotive industry. They already have undergone that decarbonization agenda or are on the way.
Right.
And shipping is the smaller brother or sister going next. So basically, whatever you see, we're seeing a lot about digitalization. And yeah, you go to the automotive and we're seeing even autonomous cars. So why not into shipping? Maybe there's, for sure, you need to put it into context, into the sector. But all those big topics, new alternative fuels, we're talking about electrification, we're talking about so much stuff, aerodynamics getting into it. So there's plenty of opportunities to make a meaningful impact on an industry that is really global and it's moving the world around on the cargo.
One of the things that I was thinking about this weekend actually is amount of value of goods that shipping brings to the entire globe versus the number of people. It's fantastically large, like in terms of the ratio, or if you look at the other way, there's a not as many people as you think running all of the shipping in the world. Even if you count up all the sailors, all the port workers, you think about that compared to like the financial industry. And I'm going to do a little homework on that because I always thought it was interesting, which means going back to your point is you can make a bigger impact, whether it's decarbonization, whether it's through efficiencies, whether it's through just making sure that ships show up in safe, a friend of mine's a ship pilot. His job is to drive a ship up, up the river and to dock it safely. Okay, that's a really big part of the global economy, and that happens every day around the world in places all over. And I think it's pretty fascinating. That's I think you captured at least two. Decarbonization wasn't a thing when I was getting to school, but the first two things were very much of interest to me when I started my journey. And moving on, speaking of journeys, we were talking beforehand, and you looked like you had a super successful show at SMM. You said there was probably double the number of delegates or people floating around. You're in Spain. You had to travel up to Germany. What did you throw in your bag to read? Is that like, because I know some engineers, I had a couple engineers on the show and they're like, oh, I read design specs in my spare time. I'm like, yeah, dude, man, listen, I love you, but that's a little like, I guess that's why
No, no.
you're an engineer and I'm not. but you're laughing. But so what did you throw in your bag besides design specs?
So when I finish my working hours, somehow I really want to relax. Either I go into pottery because I had an injury recently, so I cannot go to the gym anymore, at least for some months.
Oh, okay.
Or I read. So I've increased the number of books I'm reading, which leaves me more time not going to the gym, unfortunately. But the book I'm reading is quite different to the ones I usually read. It's a book on geopolitics. So it's called Destined for War. So basically it speaks about the Thucydides trap. I'm not sure, I never get this name right, but Thucydides, in theory, he was the first like historian person
Okay.
who wrote the first book in history, like of history, which
Okay.
basically said that when there's a racing power and challenges a ruling power, this 100% will end up in war. So basically, can America and China escape this Thucydides trap?
Uh,
Literally, if you look at history, there's been like 16 Thucydides events, and of those, 12 have ended up in a war. So basically, I'm more into the geopolitical aspect because shipping really is so much affected on geopolitics that literally I'm like really looking forward to like know what people are thinking about this topic. So basically, I'm more into the geopolitics side.
That's really interesting. And I think that, you know, that actually brings to an interesting point, which we'll close with is one of the things that you kind of took for granted. And certainly before COVID and some of the other things around sanction is you didn't discuss geopolitical risk, country risk. And, you know, certainly with COVID, there was some, you know, which countries would allow people in, which countries were open for business, all this other stuff. Certainly with sanctions now, you're looking at that. And I remember when I was in school studying economics, that was always one of the risks. And I just seemed like as we opened up the borders, that risk was almost sidelined. And then now it's coming back into full force, which makes a book like what you're reading seem to be a little bit more relevant to what shipping is, because there is a geopolitical risk sticking your ship in a different country, especially if whether it's, you know, how it's flagged, how it's crewed, all these things, what cargo's on, who, you know, who owns the cargo, who owns the ship, who's the title holder of all this stuff. You know, are you on a sanction list? It's going to continue to be in play here.
I want to say the positive side. So the book not only covers this, for sure, there's a geopolitical risk. Experts say it's around 30 to 35% more or less. The Thucydides trap would be 75. So sort of you can be in the middle. And that is for 15 years timeline. But the book really also addresses the big topic. Can we escape from it? Because from those 12 out of 16, so there's sort of this 25% that escape. And we're clever enough to know that the war is never good for both sides. So basically, it also has like a positive outcome. The book also covers this positive side. We can literally escape from it if we do certain.
Boy, you could talk a lot about things certainly during the Cold War and proxy wars. I wonder if the book gets into that, because you know, you got that. We never really fought. Russia and the U.S. never really fought, but we kind of did in different places, and it can get very interesting. And somebody asked if I was going to do a 3-hour Joe Rogan type podcast, which I said nobody wants to hear me talk for 3 hours. This would be a topic to talk for 3 hours on. Cristina, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for being patient, getting on the podcast. I know we've been talking about this really since the late winter, early spring. So thank you for coming on, and I appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. And yeah, if you want the performance team engaged, whoever, like, I'm sure they would love to be here.
We'll have them on at some time. Absolutely. I'd love to have him. Cristina, thank you for coming on.